morning, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. On behalf of the Collins-Griffith Commemoration Committee, I want to welcome all of you here to Glasnevin Cemetary this morning. And I also want to thank those of you who were in Berkeley Road Church earlier on. This is a very proud occasion for us as a committee. We're remembering the 90th anniversary of the deaths of these two great Irishmen. And we're very proud as a committee that we have maintained the continuation of these ceremonies in Glasnevin Cemetery for almost all of those 90 years. And we're very, very proud that we've managed to do that. In a few moments, I'll be handing you over to Seamus Scally, our PRO, who will be conducting the ceremonies for the remainder of the day. Just one other thing I want to say to you before I hand you over to Seamus, and that is that we have managed to launch our website, and again that was through the great work of Anne Desmond and Jim Walsh, and our website is now online, or whatever the expression is, and it can be visited at any time. If you want to take a note of the website address, it's www.Collins-Griffith.org. I think that's the full address. It's well worth a visit. There's some beautiful links and some very good articles about Collins, and some historic photographs which we hope to have put up there very, very shortly. So thanks very much again, ladies and gentlemen, for coming. I'll now hand you over to Seamus, and he will take you through the ceremony from here on in. Thanks.
Goramahagot, Eddie. Céad míle fáilte roimh go léir a cháirde an ócáid Starrowil Shop. Deputies, senators, councillors, special guests, relatives, ladies and gentlemen, you are all very welcome here this afternoon for the 90th commemoration to honour the memory of two great Irish men, General Michael Collins and President Arthur Griffith. As I've said many times before, they were patriots, statesmen and political leaders. They had different personalities and backgrounds, but they were united in their very deep love of Ireland. They had many tremendous qualities, but most certainly courage was the greatest one. We will now commence proceedings, and I'm very pleased to introduce Councillor Pat Hines from the Loughrea electoral area of Galway County Council, who has kindly agreed to lay the wreath on the grave of General Michael Collins. Councillor Pat Hines. Goramila Mahagut, Aforik, thank you very much indeed. Thanks. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I will call on Eamon Lord, who is our Vice Chairperson, to lead us to the graves of Arthur Griffith and Eamon Duggan. Eamon. So it is my pleasant duty at the moment to call on Professor Richard Mulcahy. He is, as you all know, I'm sure, he's the son of General Richard Mulcahy, who was Fine Gael leader in his time, and he is going to lay the wreath on the grave of Arthur Griffith. Professor Richard Mulcahy. Goramilamacha got Rister Mulcahy. Now it is my pleasant duty to introduce Marita Cosgrave. She's one of our joint treasurers. She is a grandniece of Philip Cosgrave, who was a Fine Gael TD in Dublin in the 1920s, one of the Cosgrave family. And Marita will lay a wreath on the grave of Eamon Duggan, which is behind Arthur Griffith's grave. Eamon Duggan, as you know, was a signatory of the treaty. Marita. Goramila Mahagut, Marita, thank you so much. We're very deeply honoured also today, ladies and gentlemen, to have as our special guest speaker, Dr. Patrick Wallace. Dr. Wallace is a native of Askeaton, County Limerick. Until his recent retirement, he was the director of the National Museum of Ireland, a post which he held for 23 of the 40 years which he spent in that institution. Previously, as I'm sure many of us recall, he was the archaeologist in charge of the museum's excavations at Wood Quay. He is well known for popularising heritage and Viking Dublin in the media and has lectured exclusively at home and abroad. Incidentally, he was the guest speaker at Béal na Bláth in 2003, and he is a believer in the Collins-Cosgrave tradition. We are absolutely delighted and thrilled that Dr. Patrick Wallace is going to be our guest speaker today. Put your hands together, please, for Dr. Wallace.
Agus acáda is honor mór don bhean seo I bhór run order no. Cé dúirt é sin ní bheith cá mé bheith I ngár don maic istóliam. Is rí honor don bhean seo. Os rud é go bhfuil me clán hain hús ó limnach é seo lom. Ach las mod a sin tá Gwelte Iceláin, tá hena gomar cuidas den clán Iceláin, agus tá siad ina chonaí an seo I mná lia. Ach, las má even muintir Iceláin, tá ristead Mulcahy in our golódar comá. Agus Dini will Wintergol Griffith. Ladies and gentlemen, it's an amazing honor for me to be here today. In 2003, I had the honor to speak. I was invited to speak at Béal na Bláth, and I regard that as the greatest honor of my life. Today's invitation I consider to be the... Sorry, this microphone. I have a couple of awkward friends at the back there can't hear. Today's invitation I consider hecklers from the other political persuasions. Today's invitation I consider to be the equal of that. And I'm most thankful to the committee for asking me to speak at this sacred place. 9 years ago, I spoke of the continuing relevance to contemporary Ireland of the life and legacy of Ireland's most enduring hero, Michael Collins, particularly in the context of nurturing and retaining our national identity in areas. This was the height of the Celtic tiger, so-called, when we were turning our backs on everything, including common sense. But things like language, place names, and cultural heritage, areas in which Collins and Cuileánach was very interested. And by the way, Griffith was even more so. Reports of my speech of that day must have struck an acceptable balance, because on the following day I was honoured by congratulatory phone calls from two former Taoiseach, Liam Cosgrave and Charles Haughey. So I was honoured by both, I can tell you, and delighted. And I must have struck a chord there right in the centre of things. Previously, or maybe the reporter from the Irish Times struck a chord based on my few remarks down in Bailnablaw. Anyway, previously I had done a radio programme which I compared the impact of on my then young life of the murder, of the assassination of John F. Kennedy, with the parallel impact on my father's life of the death of Collins. He never got over that. It was one of the major influences of his life. But you will hopefully permit me today to use this opportunity to concentrate more on the neglected Griffith rather than on his great comrade Collins, whose reputation, in the words of Griffith himself, the man who won the War of Independence, Collins, needs no more acclamation from me. Because I'm deserting him momentarily, I hope you will understand. Today, my speech is entitled, Giving Griffith His Due. Not only do I believe in the pivotal role played by Griffith in the 17 long years before the Easter Rising in keeping alive the necessity for a native parliament in charge of its own fiscal destiny and strongly supporting Irish industry as part of an economic policy of protectionism and self-reliance. Griffith's mantra, being ourselves, or Sinn Féin as he termed one of his many newspapers, and from 1905, the new nationalist, abstentionist political movement he co-founded with Bulmer Hobson. W.T. Cosgrave, as a 25-year-old, and his uncle were at that first convention. And Cosgrave was later to give the oration at Griffith's funeral on this very spot. I'll come back to Cosgrave in a moment. Griffith was the national philosopher, a printer, a dub, may I say, a real dub, a printer, a writer, a polemicist, a thorn in the side of complacency and of imperialism. And after the death of his own hero, Parnell, a critic of the Irish Parliamentary Party, whom he insisted should take their seats in Dublin and not at Westminster. His strategy of absenteeism was later adopted by Sinn Féin after their great success in the 1918 general election, following which Dáil Éireann was set up the following January 1919. That was a glorious day in the life of Arthur Griffith. He was now a TD for East Cavan, where the year before he had won a historic by-election. But at the time of the opening of the first Dáil, he was temporarily a guest of His Majesty in Gloucester Jail. In fact, the surprising thing about Griffith is how much time he spent in jail for such a pacific, he wasn't a pacifist, but he was a pacific man, quiet man, non-violence. For the British not to have recognised that was an amazing flaw on their strategy. When you write so much, speak so much, and do so much as Griffith did, connecting with the different shades of nationalism and cultural nationalism in Dublin over such an awful long time, and when you believe so passionately, as he did, and so sincerely, in something which you personally have concluded is in the best interest of all the people of the island, especially when he signed the Anglo-Irish Treaty in December 21, you are bound over that long experience to leave hostages to fortune, which your critics will use against you, denying you rightful recognition for what you have achieved. Griffith's ardent nationalism makes him unpopular with the now more fashionable values of socialism and internationalism, though even in these respects, Griffith's experiences and pronouncements were not without sympathy. It is just that he saw them as distractions from his obsession with nationalism. All this explains why the enormity of Griffith's contribution to independence, to his philosophy of peaceful resistance, in which he actually inspired Gandhi's liberation of India. His role and Gandhi admitted that, Griffith's role was enormous. His role as a proposer, or a negotiator and proposer of the treaty in the Dáil. By the way, I'm sure you all realise that the seconder of the treaty proposal in the Dáil was General Sean McKeown, whose name has been kindly mentioned, and properly so, earlier on here today. But he finished up, Griffith, as president of the Dáil government, and he has not generally been recognised as much as he should be. To deny him his formative place in the evolution of this state, as happened on the centenary of his birth in 1971, when he was described in the Dáil as a divisive Civil War figure, is not only unfair, it is grossly erroneous. And Professor Hayes, at the time, defended that brilliantly in the press, Michael Hayes. When the variety and longevity of Griffith's legacy is considered, and when he is taken as a man of his time, looked at not for his undistinguished appearance, he was no Olympic athlete, but he was a great swimmer, incidentally, but for his integrity and for his consistency, and not for measuring up as a romantic freedom fighter that he never could have been, and not having ever said or wrote, or everything he ever said and wrote weighed against him with hindsight, he emerges as a major historical figure, albeit a humble, though opinionated dub, and more assertive, if you want to call him that, Republicans after 1917. Don't forget, in 1913, in the words of Joe Lee, the great historian, republicanism was still a fringe ideology. Pierce himself only joined the IRB in December 1913. Griffith continued to have respect, but he had the respect not only of Collins, the quintessential organiser and man of action, but of Harry Boland and Sean T. O'Kelly. He was also, Griffith was magnanimous enough to step down from the presidency of Sinn Féin when he saw the way the wind was blowing after the 1916 executions and the threat of conscription. Griffith had difficulties with Childers, but in fairness, Childers was to describe Griffith as the greatest intellectual force stimulating the national revival between 1916 and 1919. That's praise indeed from an adversary. And in a different way, Griffith had disagreed with James Larkin's tactics, though he had a very, very good relationship with James Connolly. Rehousing the poor was a major pillar of Griffith's political faith. His anti-Semitic remarks, about which a lot has been made, were made in the context of corruption in South Africa, the usury scandal in Limerick City in 1904, the Dreyfus affair in France. It wasn't that Griffith was against Dreyfus. Griffith was so pro-French because of the historical ties that linked the struggle of Ireland down the centuries with France. But this should be balanced against his close friendship, all of this, Griffith's close friendship with several Jewish families in Dublin, two of whom bought him a home in Clontarf. So much did they think of him. Indeed, so strong was his support for the settling of Jews in Palestine that he would today almost qualify as a Zionist, which he appears to have been. Remember, he always supported the underdog against imperialism. And Cecil Rhodes, the great British explorer or destroyer or whatever you want to call him, he was a particular target of Griffith's. Griffith has also been criticised about his dual monarchy idea, which he first floated in 1904 in the context of suggesting, in the context of the Austria-Hungary arrangement, that we should use that as a model for Britain and Ireland, for both countries to operate independent, equal parliaments with a shared monarchy. Now, while this idea seems unattractive, very unattractive, to us nationalists now, more than a century later, it would not have been entirely alien in the Home Rule pre-Republic era, and it did go miles beyond the Home Rule then being canvassed by the Irish Parliamentary Party. This, when he was writing this, was well more than a decade before the Easter Rising and the executions which followed it, which brought change to everything in Ireland and elsewhere, and a decade before the outbreak of the Great War, which led to the collapse of the old European empires. Like many nationalists after him, Griffith, like Collins, always had an eye to the retention of Ulster within the entity of Ireland, be that through the ill-fated Boundary Commission, as it turned out, or through armed support, as was Collins's approach. Maybe Griffith's ideas in all this will be looked at again now in the context of any future moves to peacefully bring closer the two parts of the island of Ireland post the Good Friday Agreement. It is not without relevance that Kevin O'Higgins, the politician most influenced by this aspect of Griffith's legacy, was working with these very ideas within the Commonwealth context in the year before he was murdered in 1927. Now, these may be difficult issues to grasp for those who are happy with their 26-county lot, but thanks to the work of Griffith and O'Higgins, they may yet be resurrected, but necessarily with a generosity of attitude which will have to attend upon future debates leading towards, in some form, the reunification of the island. Just as Griffith's life and writing was inspired by history, by the history and journalism of mainly of the young Ireland figures like John Mitchell and particularly Thomas Davis, who Thomas Davis is referred to so warmly in the treaty debates in 1921-22 by Griffith. It is also important that Griffith's life and work be available to present and future generations through the careful study of history at primary and secondary levels. We've already seen an instance here of the necessity for the study of history in our schools. Without history, my old comrade Liam Dupuer once wrote, the Irish nation is nothing. To diminish and take less than seriously the study of history in our schools will impair the background which will be essential for future politicians and electorates who will be asked to peacefully decide in referenda the way our nature must go forward. Patrick Kavanagh wasn't all wrong when he wrote that the only value of history is to stir the imagination. This need is particularly pressing in the context of the children of the new Ireland, who have to be fully integrated with us by being told the full story of Ireland, warts and all. The better informed electorates are, the more creative those drafting constitutional change can be. We've recently experienced the downside of uninformed electorates in this country. Griffith's continuing relevance to modern-day issues makes him a colossus among his contemporaries. His work in the creation of the first Senate of the Free State has been so well chronicled by Donald O'Sullivan, and it makes arguments for minorities, like, for instance, the Southern Unionists, are all relevant to the current debate and the future debate about our existing Shannon, the successor of Griffith's Senate. Griffith was also, believe it or not, one of the first advocates of PR. As far back as 1908, Griffith said that was the way. The lesson of Griffith in so many areas of public policy is that we should tread warily and always be fully informed. Yes, my listeners, Griffith had failings, and like the rest of us, said things perhaps that he shouldn't have. But when he is judged as a polemicist and a thinker, a publicist and a propagandist, as our national philosopher, as the biographer Sean O'Lewing called him, and as chairman of our delegation to London, as one of the rare statesmen who actually had an economic policy. His successor in this area is Sean Lemass, who studied the works of Griffith in jail. The economic writings of Griffith were studied by Lemass. And when Griffith's influence on W.T. Cosgrave and Kevin O'Higgins is taken into account, he is a massive figure. He deserves to be better known. A barracks, a college, a Northside Avenue are not enough for the essential originator of our free state. Griffith was the originator, Collins was the architect, and W.T. Cosgrave the builder, and General Mulcahy, I suppose, made it possible. What a troika, or a four-person, deserving our eternal respect and gratitude. It is not, ladies and gentlemen, a matter of redemption of Griffith. It's given Griffith due recognition. That he continues to inspire and be relevant today only demonstrates our national neglect of his memory. It is an oversight which must be rectified on this, the 90th anniversary of his tragic death from a brain hemorrhage. or stroke, as some historians say. This was brought about, we are led to believe, by physical and mental exhaustion. That he was found with only 1 penny in his pocket may be apocryphal, but it does demonstrate the blinding integrity and humility of a man who can truly be called a founding father of our national consciousness, our state, our Dáil, our Senate, and our democratic system. Er Yeshte Gurava Anam.